Okay, and let's get started today. So as I mentioned in this intro, we are going to go more through some updates, some tech updates that we have identified, some more emerging issues that we're putting onto a quote unquote phase 2 update projects, and just some answering some frequently asked questions. So today we're not necessarily going to go through the actual basics of the ECP technology pieces. That is still included here. And so I'm showing the NAI webpage of the training materials, both for ECP and our rules education. So you can access the rules education ECP training materials on the right side, blue banner, and that will bring you to both the presentation that you can watch for a video, or you can access the PDF quick guide. So all of that still remains the same, and that information is helpful to get you started if you're brand new to accessing NAI Connect and the ECP system. Some updates on kind of a new way of looking at things. We've gotten some frequently asked questions, and I want to share just how these things can be still identified within the ECP, but just might be a little bit of a different way of looking at things from what you're used to with the past system. So first piece is the roster and searching for students. So just as a reminder, you're building off of a roster of each sport, and not across your full student athlete body. So that's a different way of looking at things from this previous system. So we had some questions about trying to search for a student athlete that might be at a different on a different team and not able to find them. And just a reminder that you can search and filter within this roster view, but it's going to be specific to that sport. And if a student is going to be on another sport, you will have to enter their information twice. So similar how we used to do it with labeling students sometimes in 2 different manners or 3 different manners if they're on different teams, and kind of creating duplicate roster views or student views. We did that in the past so that you would not have to go in and unlock a student's record to change things after certifying them off of previous teams. So this is going to alleviate this whole unlock issue that we've had in the past, and you'll be able to certify the student athlete on that specific sport roster. Also, a reminder that the roster view itself, as you'll see, it has your eligible students, your ineligible students, and in progress students. So in progress is just another way of how you will view the on hold students. We can look at, rewriting that in a way in tech possibly down the road. But if you have started working on a student and want to place them on hold, they will show as in progress until their final determination has been made, either eligible or not eligible. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but we're starting to hear a little bit more about questions on the ineligible worksheet. So as of right now, we do not have an ineligible worksheet to produce out of this roster view. You can print this page as a roster for information that will include, as you see here, the student's information, name, sport, ECID, campus ID, whether they've been certified or not, terms of attendance, and whether they are a transfer. So that is included in this roster view that you're welcome to, of course, to print. And you can show there that there are these student athletes with their associated names under the ineligible section. As we've heard from members that they think it's valuable to share that with coaches so they specifically know who is ineligible. So we recognize that that doesn't necessarily show why they are ineligible necessarily outside of this view. So we will talk about that here in a second. But in the meantime, the importance for you is to have a list to show ineligible students to the coach so they're not accidentally competing these students. You can at least show them a list of students who have not been certified and are not eligible. Okay. One of the big important fixes that we are identifying is that students who are receiving an eligible decision in PlayNAIA are not syncing over to the ECP system. So this by far is probably the biggest question and concern that's raised, and we definitely understand that this is an issue that we're working to hopefully remedy ASAP within this next week. So students with that you're finding in this issue, that you might have one or two, you're not able to find them in your shortlist section. Send the student's ECID number to legislative@NAI.org. And we're working on a way to sync these students, more of a manual push. So once they are synced, the students will show in the unassigned student section. I think as of right now, and Scott R., you can correct me if I'm wrong, but give us about 24 hours to force these students into the next synced session. And again, just check in the unassigned section when the students have been synced over, but do not, under any circumstances, create a profile from scratch, because that could ultimately lead to duplicate profiles, and we don't want that in ECP. So again, if you have a student that all the information is showing in PlayNAIA, that they have an eligible decision, but they're just not showing up in your shortlist section, send Legislative Services the student's ECID number, and we'll work on manually syncing that student over to the system. Other important bug fixes that we're working on is being able to enter a contest date that's before the start date of class. We have identified at least one instance of this where there is at least one contest before the start date of class, and I'm sure there's going to be more instances of this. So we're going to make sure that that is still available, that you're able to enter a contest date that's before the start date of class. Students showing as eligible in the section of their roster when they do not have an EC decision yet. So at this point in time, we're still working on finding examples of this. We've been notified at least a couple times that this has occurred. So please triple check your eligible section, that students that are listed in the section do actually have an eligible EC decision. If you find it that there is a student listed in the eligible section of the roster that do not have an eligible EC decision, please send that example over to Legislative, and we'll make sure that that is entered into the queue as an example, so that we can kind of figure out where this bug might be occurring. Issues with the certificate Excel export tab. So again, as you're working through the certificate process, and you're getting to the point where you have included all your student athletes on the certificate that you have built, at the details section of the certificate, it will say Excel export. And so you are able to export your certificate to double check the data off of the Excel sheet before actually submitting this certificate to be signed by all 4 signers. So we heard of an issue of that not occurring correctly, or the export tab was not showing. So we're going to double check that that is still okay and ready to go. But if you have an issue, again, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we're able to identify any other additional bugs, but we'll be able to remedy that soon. And then regarding the coach's view, a coach is specific to the sport in which they are the head coach. We've heard that there are some coaches that can view rosters that are not part of their sport. So we, again, also want to make sure part of their restriction is they are able to view only their roster. They're not able to edit. It's going to be a view only piece. So we want to make sure that the coaches are viewing only their roster. All right. Second phase of enhancement updates. So things that are still in the works, but are not part of this very first rollout of the ECP certification piece. And that is certificate exports that for the Excel sheet, or at this point in time, do not include the institution's student ID number. So we're looking to add that at some point as well, if it's an important piece. Clearly identifying a roster as a varsity or JV roster in the roster view. Right now, you'd actually have to click in and kind of ID if the roster is a varsity or JV roster. So we're looking to make that more clear in the roster view. The members request to be able to have a printable roster view before moving into the certificate process. So again, at this time, the only printable view you have is if you were to print the roster itself, but it does not include all needed information if that is what really the members value. So we're looking into that piece right now. The only piece we have is the export Excel sheet that you're able to export after a certificate has been created and prior to sending to all 4 signers. Members' request for the ineligible student athlete worksheet. As I said prior, you're able to identify the ineligible student athletes at this time, again, on the roster view, but finding the reason behind the ineligible student athlete worksheet, finding the ineligible information on a student athlete worksheet has not been created yet. So we're looking into creating that. So a little bit more of a detailed view in the export function. Hopefully we'll have that something to review in a testing in the next couple of weeks or so. A member's request to enter student data and or mark as a transfer, select the hold piece on hold and have the data retained. We've heard reports that if you go in and want to put in maybe like terms of attendance and mark that the student is a transfer, it requires the person to input all data and then put the student on hold. Otherwise, all the data on that student's page is lost. So we're making notes of that. Again, feel free to send us ECIDs and example if you're having issues where the data is not saving fully. So we want to make sure that if you're putting in maybe even partial data and or marking the student as a transfer and wishing to put them on hold, that you're still able to do so and keep the data retained. And then clearly marking that a certificate has been submitted after the date of first competition. So this piece here would be when those in the certificate view, when the certificate has been submitted at this time, there's no distinguishing whether a certificate has been submitted before the first competition or after. So keep that in mind as your teams are starting to compete, that it may not be a very clear view immediately upon looking at the certificates that a certificate has been submitted late, but we are working on a view, whether it's marked in a red flag or red letters that will show that the certificate has been submitted late after the date of first competition. So we want to make sure that that is clearly identified. So a quick question here. I'll be able to answer this really quickly. It's asking, Sully's asking, do teams need to have a separate JV and varsity roster to be certified separately to compete in JV competitions with this new system? No, they do not have to have a JV roster. You certainly are able to certify and mark these students all as varsity participants if it's easiest to do that way. This was just a new piece of this new system that we're able to make different rosters for those that have maybe a heavier JV roster system and want to track those students separately, but it's not a requirement. Okay. Question on did all prior student athletes transfer over, or do we need to create new rosters? Again, all of your student athletes should be showing in the shortlist view. So look to make sure all the student athletes that have either, of course, been on a shortlist this immediate spring and summer as they're receiving new EC decisions, and then in the prior years, the student athletes should be showing in your shortlist as the very first time to pull students into your roster to start working off of a roster system. If they're not there, please let us know and send us an ECID so that we can track down if the student has indeed been able to be synced over, or if we need to force the student over to be synced. Okay, forms, a reminder on forms and how they support the ECP system. Certificate of clearance, we also have gotten quite a few questions on the certificate of clearance. And at this point in time, the certificate of clearance is not something that we are able to export out of the current ECP system. We also received kind of some advice and guidance from our ECP beta testers. And we know many institutions have their own way of collecting the certificate of clearance, whether it's an electronic signature to sign off on FERPA regulations, or just basically done in a different form or fashion. So that's perfectly fine as long as you're able to have students sign that they understand that we're utilizing their information for certification purposes. So the official way of having a certificate of clearance, if you don't have your own form to use, you can go to our eligibility certification forms under the legislative forms section and utilize that PDF to have students sign that form. So that's just a really basic PDF form that you're able to use. If you're curious to hear a little bit more about other certificate of clearance options of how other schools do it, we're looking at gathering those examples, and we can share some examples online in legislative services. But if you're looking to have something to start from here, you can use the certificate of clearance. The transfer player eligibility statement has been updated. And so there is the paper form or the PDF form again under the eligibility certificate forms. These questions here that have been updated do mimic the way that the questions have been updated online in the ECP system. So you're looking at a student's profile, you want to mark them as a transfer. The questions have been reduced to prevent some redundancy and also prevent errors where you're looking to collect information separately from, say, the PlayNAIA decision. So the new transfer player eligibility statement is going to be included looking at the student's PlayNAIA decision if they're a first-time NAIA participant, or confirming via the FAR that you have all required transcripts, official transcripts, and documentation to accurately determine the student's eligibility. So if you want to have a paper form of this, especially to have the students sign off on this, the transfer player eligibility statement has been updated online. You're able to print that form, have the student fill out the information and sign along with the FAR. The competitive experience review has also been updated, really has been the same since last year with the online form, but also it is embedded in the ECP page for the student along with the transfer information. So you're able to click the applicable information in the competitive experience review. So remember, the key for the competitive experience review is that if the student has not been charged an intercollegiate season the past year, and that includes those student athletes that may not have competed in more than 20% of their season as an NAIA athlete, you'll still have to ask the questions of whether the student competed in outside competitive experience in order to make sure that the student athlete and all their outside competitive experience is rightly documented. So it might seem a little bit daunting given the fact that maybe quite a few student athletes have not competed in more than 20% and were not charged a season of competition last year. But the very first question you just need to ask the student is, did they compete in outside competitive experience that included semi or professional athletes? So it should be a quick sign off to see if those student athletes actually do have outside competitive experience that does need reviewed or they do not. And then finally, there is in the legislative forms section a new tracer. So with the bylaw amendments from last spring, two things were changed from outside non-NAIA schools. And the question is, if the student athlete was charged just for practice, or was the student athlete charged for outside competitive experience reviewed by another athletic association, those seasons of competition will not be honored by the NAIA. So we're really getting into the question of, why was a student charged by a previous athletic association? And essentially we will only honor seasons charged for intercollegiate experience only. So the new tracer has been updated to provide examples of that. So you're free to utilize that tracer as an example as well. Okay, we're transitioning over to Rules Ed required training FAQs. Just two things I want to add to this as well. The Rules Ed required training is, again, it's in effect for basically every person within the NAIA that has some sort of advisement or role within the athletic departments. So we had some questions first about required courses versus optional, depending on your view. Some people that have a single sign-on requirement, like an assistant coach or assistant GA volunteer, they will only see the red classes. They will not see the blue classes. But those that have a full license, quite a few of you within the NAIA membership have a full license, you'll see both the blues and the red options for courses. The blue courses are optional. They are included in the red courses in some form or fashion. So a new athletics director will have basically all 7 modules that are included in the blue boxes that are separated out. So if you're interested in taking 1 or 2 that was not included in your required training, feel free to do so. A reminder again on returning members. So everybody who is basically continuing on at your NAIA institution from last year to this year will only need to take the returning NAIA members. So that example is that very last picture on this screen is the returning members course. So you'll only need to take that returning members course and not all of the other red courses. The other red courses are specific to a role. And if you're a new in your role as a coach, for instance, and you'll take the course for new coaches, SIDs and athletic trainers. If you're a new AD, you'll take your course for new athletics directors. So if you have any questions, again, email legislative services for that piece and we can clarify, but you're only expected to take 1 course depending on your role and if you're returning from your previous NAIA institution. And finally, the athletics directors reports, we're working on that piece. So the expectation is our athletics directors are going to be the ones that track that all of their coaches and all of their staff members have taken their required training prior to the first competition of the year. And so that's going to be the athletics directors that will pull a report and double check this. So we're working on finalizing that piece, and guidance will be sent out through the SCORE and other avenues. Okay. So one last piece here for reaching out to NAIA. A reminder that the NAIA Connect email, that is for tech-related questions or issues. I would actually clarify that to say tech-related issues only. NAIA Connect is definitely receiving all of these inquiries. You may not hear directly from NAIA Connect. That's where Legislative Services is really partnering with our IT guys to provide questions and provide answers to questions and reach back out to our members. So if you have just a tech-related issue specifically, or you need a password reset, you can email NAIA Connect to get that requested. There might be a little bit, as things are ramping up and getting busy, there might be a little bit of a lag time in 24 hours or so before something has been resolved. So please bear with us. But if you have some questions that might need some back and forth discussion, I would suggest emailing us, Morgan and myself, at legislative@naia.org, and we'll be able to answer that pretty quickly. We try to get back with everyone within 8 business hours. Also, this is going to be set up on our LS website, but Morgan and I have a booking page that you're able to go in and request 15 or 30-minute blocks to work with either Morgan or myself. And you're able to then ask some ECP questions, some rules questions, or if you're wanting some additional training, you're able to do that as well. So that is where you can really dig into providing some time with Morgan or myself that might take a little bit longer than working through a phone call or email. Okay, and so this information, like I said, will be posted online, the PowerPoint presentation and this recording next week at this time. So we're going to have 3 of these sessions where we are providing updates and kind of an office hours. So next week at this time, we'll provide updates to any new tech issues that have been fixed, hopefully, or things that are still in progress that we're working on. We'll provide updates to things that we might be hearing from members throughout this past week. Some additional questions we are gathering as well. So any other of those kind of questions, feel free. Again, I'll take a little bit of time to review some of the chats pieces. Looks like you guys have gotten some great interaction here about the certificate of clearance. So thank you guys for that. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and